highway is constructed on the outskirts of St. Louis, sealing off secrets of a much earlier great American city. Before it's too late, teams of rescue archaeologists are called in to investigate. What they're finding is amazing. Treasures like this figurine, and the corpse of a man lying on a blanket of shell beads, surrounded by the bodies of more than 50 young women, presumed victims of human sacrifice. Discoveries like these have been made just 10 miles from the center of St. Louis. Yet few locals know anything at all about this place called Cahokia.
Never heard of it.
It's interesting. I'd like to know more about it.
Cahokia was bigger than the medieval cities of London or Rome. In its prime, 1,000 years ago, it rivaled the great ritual centers of the Aztecs to the south. Now, it is all but lost. What was Cahokia? Who built it? And how did its people come to be forgotten by history?
Cahokia began with a big bang. And by a big bang, I mean that it was explosive. People moved to Cahokia within a very short period of time, a matter of years, a few years, possibly. It's the beginning of a new world in a sense. It's a Cahokian world.
The New World was a great city of earth mounds. At its peak, around 1050 AD, downtown Cahokia contained about 120 mounds covering 6 square miles. Clusters of mound suburbs stretched over both sides of the Mississippi, now covered by sections of present-day St. Louis. Until the ancient features were obliterated by highways and office buildings, St. Louis was actually known as Mound City. Only a few paintings and photographs of this period survive. The biggest mound was destroyed just over 100 years ago.
South Rock 102.5 KEZK with your soft, familiar favorites and your basic icon. And if you're sitting in traffic right now, Alan will be bringing you up to speed and let you know what's going on here. Alan, it's hot. You have your jug of water up there. You're not getting dehydrated, are you?
Hey, I always keep the jug of water up here with me.
Very, very good. What's it look like?
Well, 270 northbound is still slow.
Traveling with St. Louis traffic reporter Alan Barklage provides a bird's-eye view of how far the mounds once stretched and why they were constructed here. The people who built Cahokia chose this location for many of the same reasons as the builders of St. Louis. It's a natural place for a city. It's become the meeting point for Mid-America's highways, but the site is also at the confluence of 2 great rivers, the Mississippi and the Missouri, arteries for trade and communication. And the Mississippi floodplain provides fertile land, ideal for the cultivation of maize. The ancient mound builders were not one tribe, but the ancestors of many. This Native American ancestral group is known as the Mississippians. Tim Pocketat grew up in this area. Today, his work is focused on the mound builders.
Mississippian is a term that archaeologists used to describe people living from about 1,000 years ago all the way up to after Columbus. Describe people who have large-scale agriculture, who build flat-topped mounds with houses or temples on top, and who share a certain kind of culture.
The largest city ever built by the Mississippians was Cahokia. 1,000 years ago, the elite lived at the heart of the city. Their homes and temples constructed on the top of flat, four-sided platform mounds. At the center of the site and around the edges were large expanses of flat land, making great plazas. Up to 20,000 people gathered here, living in small wooden huts around ritual center poles. Dominating the site and covering an area of 14 acres is the largest mound in North America created by human hands alone.
The magic of the mound is not the mere fact that millions of cubic feet of earth were moved to construct it in basket loads, but the fact that it was purposely designed, that specific materials were procured, mixed, placed in a systematic manner with a very strong engineering sense to produce a true monument that stood for hundreds of years.
Now, it's referred to as Monk's Mound, after the Trappist monks who settled here some 700 years after it was first built. Using the techniques of core drilling and remote sensing, generating an electric current deep into the heart of the mound, Bill Woods and his team are discovering that Monk's Mound was ingeniously constructed. A meticulous combination of layers and textures of sand and clay has enabled it to survive pretty much intact for hundreds of years.
Okay, so which flag are you on?
Recently, some earth has slipped, and the team is investigating how best to repair this slump damage and secure the mound. In the course of their work, they've made an unexpected discovery.
A stone was hit, and the bore drilled through 30 feet of stone before breaking off. Formerly, it was thought that the mound was entirely composed of earth. The nearest stone is perhaps 10 miles away. My feeling about the stone is that it is either a ritual platform or a tomb.
The purpose of the stone is still a mystery, but the layers themselves give insight into what the mound builders were up to.
When excavations have been done into mounds or into the plaza down at Cahokia, we see the same thing. Very clean, purified space. So you have layers of sand that seal off lower layers, seemingly an act of purification, a sacred act.
Which means the building of these mounds was a ritual process. Joe Watkins is a Native American archaeologist from the Choctaw tribe.
This way they could actually build the earth and bring the earth up into the heavens. So they're closer to the heavens, but yet they're still part of the earth. And it was a way of allowing the entire culture to actually pull themselves up to create a mountain, to perhaps become a god for a year or two and have your own mountain that your culture built. You know, it's like a lot of the monuments today when someone builds a skyscraper or something made of glass and steel. Back then it was something that you could hold, something that you could form and squeeze and turn into something that was of importance to an entire culture.
Cahokia left no written records, so the finds and findings of archaeologists provide the only way to understand its people. "45 mounds and a great plaza once stood here in East St. Louis, a rundown urban area now covered by highways. Archaeologists are in a race against time to investigate before more construction begins. Among the remains of houses, they are finding arrowheads, broken pieces of pottery, and galena, a natural form of lead which can be crushed up to make a white pigment. Colored pigments, may have been used by the Cahokians to decorate their bodies, an early Native American tradition. But archaeologists are also finding other precious metals, copper and mica from the Great Lakes, and marine shell from the Gulf Coast over 600 miles away, crafted into beautiful artifacts. Cahokia was almost certainly a place of pilgrimage, and these treasures were probably brought as offerings. One of the most significant finds was made during the construction of this highway. The rescue archaeology team was led by Tom Emerson.
In this figurine, we see a skirt that probably comes down to her knees. It has a wraparound band around the waist. She's wearing skin moccasins, and she's naked from the waist up. We assume that she also had a very simple hairdo in which the hair is simply pulled straight down the back.
Another figurine found at the same time shows us what was considered beautiful for Cahokian women. The high, flat forehead suggests that these women's skulls may have been tightly bound when they were babies. It's thought that women played a powerful role at Cahokia, not just looking after the fields, but controlling the inheritance of land.
In her right hand, the woman holds a stone hoe. This is used in agriculture for the growing of corn. It would have been used to till the fields. We believe this figurine represents the Corn Mother. The Corn Mother is a very common theme in Native American mythology.
The rhythms of the natural world lay at the heart of the Cahokian way of life. Their pottery figurines are the unique expression of a shared Native American tradition. When the Corn Mother tills the back of the earth serpent, it splits in half and a vine emerges. As the vine climbs her back, the fruits decay and die before regenerating, reflecting the never-ending spiral of life, death, and rebirth. This spiral of life shows up again and again on Cahokia's artifacts. For early Native Americans, the earth was the mother and the sky the father. The ritual practice of building mounds was a way of bringing together earth and sky, male and female. And it worked. The extraordinary abundance of maize was living proof. Even today, tribes such as the Choctaws celebrate their close relationship with nature, just as their Cahokian ancestors did.
The refuse that we find there includes the food remains, the pots, the religious icons, and the valuables that would have been used during rituals. And a ritual of the kind that I'm talking about is more like a giant feast, a big party. So one of the reasons that Cahokia probably became Cahokia is because it was a great place to go to party with a very large crowd, a very in crowd.
George Milner has been looking at clues to the in-crowd discovered behind this motel in East St. Louis, where one of Cahokia's smallest mounds still stands.
In the 1950s, a mound was excavated here, and it contained a pit with many skeletons, all arranged in bundles, each of which consisted of several skulls and mostly limb bones. Around those bones were thousands of marine shell beads, indicating these people were high-ranking members of this society.
The number of beads reflects wealth and status. Marine shell was rare and precious. Intricate jewelry was crafted with extraordinary skill using hand tools. High-ranking Mississippians with their shell beads are thought to be buried in both conical mounds and smaller ones known as ridge tops. These men may have been the leaders of groups of families who made up the Mississippian clans. Even in life, they carried signs of their status. While women dressed simply, high-ranking men had more exotic hairstyles and wore ear spools, hollow earrings which stretched their lobes.
I'm interested in ear spools because I believe that only men of high status could wear them. I like to look at the shell and see the different sizes, to try to look to see whether or not warriors wore a special type or whether priests wore another. So when I got my degree, I figured I'd earned enough status that I could wear them, and now I'm intrigued by them. It's like I'm bringing my own insights into the archaeological record.
Men are depicted hunting or playing games. The abundance of maize gave them time for leisure. Stone discs, or chunky stones, were rolled across the flat plazas. Men would bet on where they would stop, or throw spears to bring them to a halt. But was life really so comfortable? George Milner is investigating what kind of illnesses the Cahokians experienced by looking at the bone remains of both high-ranking and ordinary people.
The Cahokians of 1,000 years ago suffered from the same kinds of illnesses that their contemporaries elsewhere in eastern North America suffered from.
He's found traces of diseases similar to syphilis and tuberculosis, and some evidence of iron deficiency or anemia, probably the result of a diet rich in maize with little variety. Diseases like these were already present on the North American continent before the arrival of the Europeans.
While these diseases were around, the Cahokians seemed to be healthier than many other Mississippian peoples.
But George has made a surprising discovery about the overall pattern of health.
The health of high and low status people was about the same. That means that whether you lived on the mound and had access to fancy artifacts, or you just lived elsewhere in the valley, there was no measurable difference in the level of health.
So this 100-year period of Cahokia's history, from 1050 up until around 1150, was a golden age, bringing health and prosperity to all its people. But how was Cahokian society organized, and who was in control? Tim Pocketat is excavating at O'Fallon, a suburb of St. Louis, or for the ancient commuters of Cahokia, a day's hike away. His team has uncovered evidence of around 100 homes, all grouped closely around the remains of ritual center poles and plazas.
We are excavating what was very much an integrated community of 1,000 years ago, where people living in the houses around the courtyard would have been related to each other, would have had common concerns, would have pursued their work, all their tasks together.
The wooden pole which once stood here decayed long ago, but the excavators have marked the spot. People who lived at this site 1,000 years ago had a close sense of community that today's residents may have lost.
We are in the middle of a transient, middle-class, Midwestern American community. Each of the people in these houses tends to be their own independent actor. They're not really concerned with what's going on outside of their own little house and lawn complex.
Just like the ancient community at O'Fallon, Cahokia had its own center poles for each clan group, but on a much grander scale. And some of the posts had deep sacred significance. A circle of posts, or henge, formed a great sundial observatory. The changing length of the shadows cast by the wood henge reflects the passage of the sun through the heavens over the course of the year. It seems that this was a place for rituals to ensure the prosperity of Cahokia through the seasons.
My name is Wood Bell. I'm a Choctaw Indian, and I'm originally from Mississippi, and we live now in West Tennessee.
Today's Choctaw Indians still acknowledge the beliefs of their ancestors by performing this ancient spiral snake dance at sunrise. The rising sun aligns the posts with different landmarks on the site. On the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun rises in line with Monk's Mound. Bob Hall, himself part Native American, is an anthropologist who was one of the first excavators of the Woodhenge.
I feel that these post circles constituted more than just an observatory. The center pole is especially fascinated me because there was an association with mourning that is in connection with the mortuary ceremonies. There were rituals in which the renewal of the earth was combined with the resurrection of the dead person.
Monk's Mound is due east of the Woodhenge. If the east-west line was significant, was the same true of north-south? Looking at maps of the site, archaeologist Melvin Fowler began to see a pattern emerging. In the late 60s, he decided to excavate due south at one of the smallest mounds. The connection between posts and rituals for the dead is supported by what he found.
I made a prediction that there would have been a huge post in the ground at that point. And that's what we started our excavation looking for, was that huge post. And I must say that I was probably as surprised as anyone when we found the post exactly at that point.
And Fowler found something else at the site of this large post hole, one of Cahokia's most important discoveries.
In that mound, in the center of it, down at the bottom before the mound had been built, was one male individual in his 40s. He was laid out there on a platform of shell beads. They were also in a pattern, these shell beads, that represented a falcon.
Buried with this man were hundreds of beautiful arrowheads, chunky stones, and precious copper and mica. And the mound contained more than one burial pit. A few feet away were the skeletons of several men and women who had met a violent death.
These people were lined up along the edge of a pit and hit with a stone axe and fell into the pit. Some of them were still alive because their finger bones are dug down into the clay.
In another pit lay the skeletons of 4 headless, handless men, likely evidence of human sacrifice.
There are apparently 2 different kinds of human sacrifice in Cahokia. In one, someone was sacrificed to accompany some prominent dead person into the next world, perhaps as a servant. The other kind was probably one in which the person sacrificed was seen as representing a god or a goddess.
Bob Hall believes that these men were part of a ritual to ensure a good harvest of corn. Their deaths were thought to contribute to the life of the natural world and to benefit the earth. Many ancient civilizations shared this belief in the power of sacrifice. But there was an even more sinister discovery to come. A mass grave containing the skeletons of 53 young women. How they met their deaths remains a mystery, but perhaps they too were part of this ritual sacrifice.
They had to have been killed, I think, because you don't get that many young women of such a close age dying even in a smallpox epidemic all at once. I'm sort of the opinion that they're not sacrifices in the sense that we would think of sacrifices. Sacrifice, I think, has an implication of sort of unwillingness, but these people, when it was their time to be buried with the chief, probably willingly did it.
What kind of chief could be laid to rest over a falcon, a strong symbol of power and violence, and take so many lives with him? What was significant about the location of his grave? Fowler looked again at the layout of Cahokia. His excavations uncovered 2 further post holes in this area, forming the beginnings of a circle. Could it be that this was the site of a second henge? If Fowler was right, the circle would have gone right through a mound close by. He began excavating.
We decided to put a trench through it to get a good cross-section of it. And as we got toward the center, we found 2 things. One was at a point where we had predicted there would be a post. We did indeed find a post pit. But then right next to the post pit, we began to run into a very unusual construction.
What the team discovered was layers of different sand and clay, similar to the layers which make up Monk's Mound, a clear indication that this was a special, sacred place. It was also becoming clear that this was indeed the site of a second henge.
Now we have 2 locations for wood henges, but we can predict where there probably are wood henges, one at the east and one at the north. And this represents a huge circle and cross, which is the basic core of the Cahokia community.
The Mississippians depict the cosmos as a cross within a circle. Fowler believes that with its north-south, west-east axis and its communities encircling the site, Cahokia was designed to reflect this worldview. The world was governed by the 4 directions and had 4 sides, just like the mounds and the plazas. And it was divided into opposites, which had to be held in balance, so a rectangular mound is paired with a circular one. The upper world of sky and fire was opposed by the lower world of earth and water. Sacred objects connected the 2 worlds. Sacred animals could swim, walk, or fly, moving between worlds. At the center of the cross, within the circle, and at the point where the upper and lower worlds meet, was Monk's Mound and the leader of Cahokia, keeping everything in balance.
And this symbolizes his connection with the powers of the universe and his ability to translate that into the very layout of the city. And I think those places such as wood henges and the center by Monk's Mound and the Pan Plaza are places where people actually come together to celebrate this cosmology and in effect then celebrating the power of the chief because he's the intermediary that's made this all possible.
Archaeologists have described Cahokia as a Native American Jerusalem. Ritual permeated everything, from the construction of houses to the building of this carefully screened temple. From Monk's Mound, it's possible to imagine what Cahokia would have looked like at its peak. There were people milling around the plaza. There were games, rituals, and ceremonies. And there was feasting. And the chief mediated between earth and sky, keeping the whole show on the road. Cahokia had an enormous impact on the surrounding region. Outside the city, life could be very different, as Tim Pocketat is discovering 8 miles away at the O'Fallon site.
We're in a marginal environment. There are no trees, it's hot, we're far away from a major water source. Yet we have a large village here. This village, it turns out, is one of many. We're not sure how many yet, potentially hundreds.
Deer were in plentiful supply 1,000 years ago, and at Cahokia there was regular feasting on venison. Yet here at O'Fallon, zoo archaeologist Lucretia Kelly is finding very few deer bones.
We're getting a very unusual array of animals from this site. Lots of small animals. Some things like turtle bone, small turtles, box turtles in particular, lots of frogs, snakes. We also get a few tree squirrels, which I've never identified in this area. So this is quite strange.
Why did people 8 miles out of the city have to resort to eating anything they could find? And why did they settle in this village?
I'm not sure people chose to live here. It's a likely bet that these people at our site were feeding Cahokia.
It seems that Cahokia and its leaders had become powerful enough to command tribute from outlying areas.
The way I think of Cahokia is as the Big Apple, the greatest show on earth. By far the largest of all Mississippian sites.
By around 1200 AD, other smaller mound sites were growing up in the Midwest and further south. The Mississippian's second largest city was Moundville, in present-day Alabama. James Knight specializes in Moundville's history and is now curator of the site.
Cahokia and Moundville are really quite similar sites in a lot of different ways. First of all, environmentally, they're in the same kind of setting, both being next to a major river. The sites that are laid out symmetrically around plazas with very similar kinds of earthworks, with the same kinds of construction techniques, the same kinds of buildings on top. Central to these arrangements are a single large mound, Mound B at the Moundville site, Monk's Mound at Cahokia, and we believe those mounds were resided on by the paramount chiefs.
Moundville has its own treasures, incorporating once again the cross and the circle and the spiral. Mississippian chiefs combined both spiritual and political powers, a difficult balance to maintain.
For early civilizations, especially Native American civilizations, it's probably impossible to separate religion, politics, and kinship. They're all one. You have to be related to somebody to be part of a certain religious practice or a religious event. And whenever you have power relations between people, which you have at lots of religious events even today, you have politics.
Around 1200 AD, after over 100 years of peace and prosperity, the leaders of Cahokia ran into trouble. Cahokians used wood for building, cooking, and heating. Demand for this commodity would have increased dramatically with the rising population. Archaeologists now believe that deforestation had a devastating effect on Cahokian agriculture.
The problem was the fields were getting flooded. They're maize fields. And what I think is going on is they're actually fighting over land. It's internecine warfare.
Power struggles broke out between the clans who had once operated in harmony to build Cahokia. Cahokia's elite surrounded the central portion of the site with a stockade 2 miles long. As no external forces at this time had the power to challenge them, the threat must have come from within Cahokia. Archaeologists believe that from around 1200, there was a radical change in the position of women. It's thought they lost control over the inheritance of land at Cahokia and that a shift occurred towards a male-dominated society. Corn goddess figurines were smashed and burned. Artifacts from this later period often feature the falcon or thunderbird, with its ominous association with power, death, and conflict. Ironically, building the stockade created even more difficulties. Archaeologist Bill Eisminger has been exploring its implications.
First of all, you're cutting down 20,000 trees and you're building this wall 4 times. That's a pretty sizable forest that you're cutting down, which means you're cutting down also the habitats of various animals that you hunt for food and other flora and fauna that are important to you. It means you're competing more with other people for the same resources, so there's increased competition and, again, more conflict, so it's kind of a vicious circle.
And the Cahokians shared some of our own environmental problems.
I guess it's something that happens around the world. Probably had pollution here. I'm sure they had smog. You think about all the fires burning every day, and a hot summer day like this, you'd have just a pall of smoke hanging over the valley. It just became a city with city problems.
Just like today's politicians, Cahokia's leaders were pressed to appear more accountable to the people. So changes were made to the structure of Monk's Mound to make the power elite more visible.
A first terrace was added, and the activities that went on there could be seen, one could hear, one could probably smell what was going on there in the ritual nature. The leadership was much closer to the people. They had to be at that time. There were problems.
But worse was to come. At this most sacred site there was a landslide. Even today, the west side of Monk's Mound looks unstable.
This would be the Vatican, the White House, and Buckingham Palace all put together. Can you imagine what would happen if a quarter of it suddenly fell off?
This omen must have caused even greater panic among people already fighting for survival.
When Cahokia was in decline, we see increasing evidence of conflict in this area and in surrounding regions. For example, this sternum or breastbone has an arrowhead lodged in it. This bow and arrow wound would have been lethal.
People left their homes in search of safety, and by 1400, 400 years after Cahokia's Big Bang, the great city was deserted.
Empires rise and fall, states grow and collapse. Cahokia was no exception. Our own society is no exception. We have economic cycles now, and the balance of power shifts around the world through time. It's the same thing in the past.
All the great Mississippian mound centers followed the same pattern of rise and fall, but the cycle was about to take an even greater downturn. It would be centuries before the Native Americans could begin to recover.
Could these centers have rebounded, and would they eventually have become state-like societies? European contact in the early 16th century, primarily by the Spaniards, put an end to all that, really sort of driving a nail into the coffin.
When they abandoned their site, the Cahokians splintered into tribal groups, and their old community structures were broken up. Europeans arrived on the American continent about 100 years after Cahokia's decline. The devastating effects of the diseases they brought with them makes tracing Cahokia's direct descendants very difficult. No one can ever really know what happened to them. Yet Native American tribes still trace their heritage to Cahokia. Joe Watkins is from the Choctaw tribe, which has its geographical roots in the Mississippi Valley.
Quite a few Choctaw, quite a few southeastern Indians believe that Cahokia could have been the grand homeland, the place from where we all came before we were differentiated tribes. It's like the way the Palestinians view the Holy Land, that it's where we started, where our genesis began.
This group of Choctaw dancers still acknowledges the four directions, the basis for Cahokia's layout, performing each dance 4 times. The dancers wear sashes embroidered by Choctaw women that feature the same spiral and scroll found on Cahokia's artifacts. Sashes are worn today by the drummers who accompany stickball, a game thought to be over 500 years old. Stickball may well have been one of the games played at Cahokia.
My grandmother instilled in me the need to know the Choctaw history. And we were walking on a ridge by my grandmother's homestead and found an arrowhead. I guess I was about 10 years old. And so that made me think that so much of American Indian history, if you will, was here before the Europeans came.
The colonists tried to deprive the Native Americans of not only their land, but their history.
The early settlers would often attribute these mounds to other cultures, such as the Phoenicians, the Celts, the Egyptians, the Romans, or some other race unknown who they classified as the mound builders. And even today there's some people that would like to think that it's somebody else besides the Indians who built these mounds.
The remains of the great mound centers were plundered and destroyed.
Some of the most famous artifacts from Moundville were plowed up and were literally given away, were bought for 50 cents or $1 or $1.50 for a pittance, and the farmers thought nothing about plowing over and therefore destroying many of the mounds. And this is not specific to Moundville, it's true of most of these centers.
In America, history begins either with Columbus in 1492 or with the Pilgrims in the 1600s, and there's not a great deal known about the history of the American Indian. History was always a circle. There was never a beginning, there was never an end, it always repeated itself. So we try to keep our children, we try to make them understand that the history is not dead.
Joe's quest as an archaeologist is to uncover and preserve this forgotten past. Native American archaeologists are rare, and Joe experiences both sides of a difficult relationship.
Archaeologists believe that, well, I can't be objective enough about what I'm looking at. American Indians believe, well, here I am, I've sold out, and I'm actually helping those grave diggers try to dig up everything that they ever placed with their human remains.
The biggest collection of ancient Native American artifacts is held by the Smithsonian. In the last 10 years, new laws have given Native Americans the power to reclaim human remains and sacred objects for reburial. Slowly, things have begun to change.
I'm struck with the extreme opposite views about the artifacts. One is that they are witness to everything that Native Americans have ever been and perhaps ever will be. And the information they can tell us is just, it's begging to be told. But also I'm struck with the idea that they shouldn't be there. They should be either back with the people who made them or back with those who created them and hoped that they would be with them whenever they left this planet.
Most Native Americans lost their ancestral homelands to the settlers. Joe's family was among the Choctaw, who were separated from the rest of the tribe in the Mississippi Valley and forced to move to Oklahoma. He's taking his children on a special journey back to their Mississippi roots, 600 miles away.
This is the first trip that my family has made back here. They've been asking, are we there yet? Through 14, 15 hours of driving on interstates and back road. It's like a pilgrimage. It's where we all think about going back to see where we started from, where our roots are.
After centuries of persecution and upheaval, Cahokia's descendants, now dispersed throughout the United States, are again building close communities on strong economic foundations. This Choctaw Reservation, 450 miles from Cahokia in Philadelphia, Mississippi, has its own factories and schools, partly financed by one of the largest casinos in North America. These investments for the future build on solid foundations of the past. 22 miles from the reservation is a very special place for the Choctaw, a mound which still carries some of the ritual significance that Cahokia had for their ancestors.
You can see a long ways up there, can't you? Up on top of the mountain, you can feel the spirits of all the people who were there before. You can almost hear the hustle and bustle of people in the village below. You feel much closer to the sky.
Some Choctaw still bring prayers and offerings to the ancestors buried here.
When people make the offerings at the mounds, they use a lot of different objects. What they're doing is they're putting their wishes in that, or their hopes, or perhaps they're trying to bring something to bear for a loved one. And they can bring that and they will put it into the ground. They will perhaps say a prayer, make an offering with tobacco or burn cedar. And it's all to ground their hopes in the earth, and they use the tobacco to help carry their prayers higher up into the sky. We can continue to make the mound a part of our culture, a part of our lifestyles.
Yeah, you have to make a wish.
And eventually, perhaps my grandchildren will go there and make an offering and wish good health for me or for their children too.
Washington is laid out every bit as meticulously as the ancient Native American cities. And here, just a few yards from the capital, a new museum is bringing Cahokia's descendants right into the heart of another American center of political power. Overseeing this major new project for the Smithsonian is Charlotte Heath, herself Native American.
Next to us is going to be one of the most important museum developments in the last 100 years, and that's the opening in 2002 of the National Museum of the American Indian on the last open site on the mall next to the Capitol. The architecture is really curvilinear in design and follows a lot of ideas that American Indians have about the circle, the spiral, the beginning and the end of certain patterns of life. And it has a truncated dome on the top, which actually looks very much like a mound.
At Cahokia, things are also changing. Now a World Heritage Site, its place in history is at last becoming more widely acknowledged. Around 100 mounds are now preserved within the Cahokia Mound Site. Archaeologists dream of extending the site boundaries to reclaim some of the mounds that have been lost under the highways of East St. Louis. People living among the remains of the mounds are now fighting to prevent further destruction. Paul Chuckalow's father bought the land on which this mound stands in 1920. Soon after, he was approached by engineers wanting to buy the earth as fill dirt for a highway.
They proposed a figure of something like $150 for this dirt, for this mound. And that was a fortune to me at that time, a little kid. And my father said, no, he said, you can't do that. He said, it's an Indian mound. It belongs to the Indians. And I thought he was crazy to turn down a fortune like that, $150. Man, that was exceptional. But he did, and now so here we are 60-odd years later, and I'm doing the same thing that he did back then, trying to preserve this mound.
Archaeologists have named this mound after Paul's father, Sam Chuckalo. He's planting a sign in his father's memory.
We'll see to it that this mound stays here forever, just like you see up at Cahokia.
More people now come to Cahokia than ever before, some for the sunrise on the summer solstice, continuing the ancient rituals.
America is not just European America, but it's a mixture of Native Americans and everyone working together and trying to develop a common history. The past is still alive, and the past is going to be our future again.